Because you can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree. You can't hate your origin and not end up hating yourself. You can't hate Africa and not hate yourself. And you show me one of these people over here who have been thoroughly brainwashed, who has a negative attitude toward Africa, and I'll show you one that has a negative attitude toward himself.
So in 2014, my life was transformed forever. My wife and I took a trip to Ferguson, Missouri, and around this time it was the aftermath of the shooting of Mike Brown. And I remember for this time I was not as connected to some of my marginalized communities because I had matriculated through college. I had kind of moved into middle-class Black America. But after so much of a wave of just oppression amongst people, I realized that I wanted to do something. I wanted to get involved, and I didn't know how. I was a part of an organization at this time by the name of the Impact Movement that services communities of African descent. And so I understood the value and authenticity of being deeply connected to the experience. However, I wasn't as involved as I wanted to be. And so I remember walking through the apartment complex, and I saw this mound of teddy bears and flowers and roses. And then the image that stood out in my mind was the paw of a teddy bear that had blood on it. And it was the blood of Mike Brown. Later on that day with the NAACP, we marched through a town called Rosebud, Missouri. And we saw multiple generations from young to old. And the things that they were saying were absolutely in contradiction to what I had been taught about humanity and the love that we ought to have for one another. And that was the moment my life got transformed. And I realized that if I don't do something about the problems facing my community, then no one will. And in 2014, after this trip to Ferguson, Missouri, I remember having a conversation with a friend. And we started talking about the problems facing communities, particularly communities of African descent and Black men. And we walked away and we said, if we don't do anything as a result of this conversation, then we are just as much a part of the problem as anybody else. And so we said, what are we gonna do? We said, I don't know. Well, what have been the transforming agents in our lives? We said, number one, it's our relationship with Christ. Number two, it's an understanding and an affirmation of our Black identity. And number three, it's an ability to have a certain level of social mobility, right? We know how to get jobs. We know how to at least take care of ourselves. And so we said, what do we do from here? I said, I don't know. Let's just take Black people back to Africa. And then about a year later, we formed our first cohort of Ghana 360.
I became interested in learning more about my Black identity, learning more about Black history. So when the experience for Ghana 360 came about, it was really intriguing, especially the part about men coming together, Black men specifically coming together. It really excited me because I always struggled with developing relationships with other men who look like me, for example. And so it was really intriguing from that perspective, but then also this perspective of being able to kind of learn about my identity as a Black person, but also my identity as a Christian, and kind of merging all of those things together in order to gain a better understanding of who I am, what my purpose in life is, and how I can impact the world around me.
I heard about Ghana 360 at the Impact National Conference. Was extremely jealous and a little salty that it was only for men, but my husband actually got to go and loved his experience, came home telling me so many stories, and I was very jealous. I wanted to go, and so when I heard about Sankofa 360 and it being a co-ed opportunity, I knew then that I wanted to be a part of that.
So we have a couple programs right now. We have a 5-week experience, which is called the Ghana 360 Leadership Challenge. And we have a 2-week experience, which is called the Sankofa 360 Challenge. Both of them have the same principle in terms of the spiritual, cultural, professional development. One, the one that's 5 weeks, it's a little bit more honed in on leadership development. And so what a typical day looks like, a part of any of our experiences is we wake up in the morning, we normally have exercise at 6:30 in the morning. From there, we'll go to a class, either a cultural class on maybe the relationship between Africans in the diaspora. We may do a language class, We may do a class on biblical manhood, marriage, or something like that. Then from there, we usually partner with the community to do different projects. In the past, we've done projects such as a solar power technology lab. We microfinanced the corn mill, as well as been able to work with kids that are part of one of our community centers to provide school clothes for about 300 children. And so we normally have classes at night. There's a lot of it's a lot of intense information. So there's a lot of community and connectedness and groups. And then we go to sleep, we wake up the next day and do it all over again.
So growing up in this environment, there's kind of this, within the community specifically, there's this sense of hypermasculinity, right? So you have to be super macho. You kind of have to be a certain way in order to be received as a man, in order to be respected. You also have from the outside these perceptions that black men and black women are angry, they're radical, they're frustrating, they're scary, they're not intelligent. So all of these different pieces kind of coming together in many ways, I think, caused some insecurity within me, made me think that maybe I'm not a man, or maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I'm not good enough. But of course, going to college really kind of began to open my mind up and change that perspective a little bit, began to help me to be interested in learning about my culture, because as a kid, because you didn't hear much about it, and not only did you not hear a lot about it, you didn't hear very many good things. So you constantly see black on black crime, you constantly see police brutality, you constantly only hear about slavery, you don't hear about the great things that people within my community did to make a difference in the world. You hear about Martin Luther King and maybe Rosa Parks, but that's about the extent to it. And so as a kid, I really didn't have much of an interest learning about black history. It just didn't seem like anything that was worth knowing about.
Racial formation is oftentimes in this country, especially for African Americans, is often formed in a very oppositional kind of quality or an oppositional setting, right? Black racial formation has often been impacted and negatively formed by the project and the logic of white supremacy, right? So I am raised and become a black race person in response to the negative and problematic construction of race that has been formed by a larger or dominant or outside group of people, particularly in this country, white Americans or European Americans, that have said that my racial identity looks like and is informed by these particular kind of practices, understandings, or logics, right?
I could definitely say I was confused growing up. I went to an all-black school from elementary to middle school, which was cool. And I still had identity issues because being lighter or having nicer hair made you considered better than the other students. So I identify with more white people, but it wasn't until I actually went to a PWI Institute, which was my high school, where I got my wake-up call was basically just you're black and you'll always be black and you can never fit in with us. And that's why I got that awakening. It's just maybe I need to find my identity. And it wasn't until I got to college where I did more research and started to hang around certain people where I began to find myself.
Identifying as a black woman and really kind of recognizing times in my life growing up where I felt that my blackness was constantly in question by others. So having a very fair-skinned mother, very fair-skinned people in my family, sometimes being asked, are you mixed? And honestly being upset by that, just because for me it was people kind of taking my blackness away, or me feeling like it was something that I had to prove to people.
So there's a hierarchy of race that then is informing that. There are certain practices or stereotypes that are associated with race, and oftentimes our identity is shaped by, or is a response to, or in an opposition to these problematic and deeply entrenched logics of white supremacy. Ethnicity, right, or positive formation of race is often in not response to white supremacy or the logics or the problems of the social construction of race, but it is in response to a shared idea of who we are, of what our histories are, how we practice or engage in certain kinds of ideas together, and therefore we develop that rather than in opposition to white supremacy or in opposition to certain kinds of intrinsic or extrinsic violences, we develop that in response to a desire to create a way of living in the world that is authentic and real to who we are. For African Americans, that becomes very difficult when our histories, when our languages, when our experiences have been so harshly and so concretely cut off from our ancestors and our previous understanding of ethnic relationship with our brothers and sisters in Africa. Our racial identity is only then, therefore, shaped by this logic in our experience in the Americas, and that's oftentimes been very problematic, very destructive, and very debilitating in the way that we see ourselves and the way that we relate to other racial and ethnic groups in this country.
I would say the first thing that I think I was aware of, I think my heart was beating so fast because the reality that I flew for hours across the seas to get to Africa when it was always like, it was something that I would say, like, I want to go to the motherland one day, but to think, no, I'm not thinking about it, I'm actually here. And then taking the first steps off of the plane and initially just knowing how warm it was. And then, I don't know how else to describe it, but it smelled like home. Like there was a sense of feeling like I'm home.
You feel like you belong immediately. Just looking around the space, everybody looks like you, so it's like, wow, this is very different, yet I feel so at home. You know, the smell in the space is different, but it just smells so good. It's like a sweet aroma because it feels like home. And so, you know, walking off the plane, seeing the different people, there's this sense of fear because you don't know what to expect, but people welcome you. They say welcome home as you interact with them. They're excited to help you with your luggage. They're excited to get to know you. They're excited to embrace you. And that's a feeling that you don't get very frequently in the States, even among other people that may look like you. You may get a head nod every once in a while, but in this particular space, it felt so much more genuine. It felt so much more lively, so much more energetic. And it was just a feeling like no other.
Favorite foods? I don't even know if I could pick because I loved it all. So I loved the fish. I would say that was a favorite. I didn't love what it looked like because I don't like things that still have eyes on them. Like I wanted it to be like, you know, a little chopped and prepared for me. But I mean, it was fresh, probably the freshest fish I've ever had.
We normally eat the same thing every day, chicken and rice, and a food called bofrots, which are like these fried donuts, which will change your life forever. I really believe that God made them with his own hands and delivered them to us to eat. I mean, bofrots are life transforming. I mean, they change your whole life.
I think as a result of being deeply disconnected from the continent of Africa, from our ethnic, religious, and cultural background that emerges from an African or an African-centered relationship with the continent, it's been that African Americans primarily have a very negative perception of the continent of Africa, have a lack of a desire to be involved with it either socially, recreationally, religiously, or economically. I also think that African Americans have adopted much of the colonial worldview that has been associated with the African continent, that continent has very little to offer to us, that it provided very little in the formation of the Western world, and that it also did very little as it relates to the construction of what we understand as an African American identity or an African American ethnic formation. We are not simply black folks that are sitting here who have made up or were made primarily up of our European forebears. No, much of who we are as black folks in this country is formed and shaped by our relationship to the African continent.
When we first landed in Ghana, we were in Accra, and then we drove 2 hours, 3 hours to Cape Coast, which was absolutely beautiful. And, you know, we had our roommates. Bree was my roommate. Love you, Bree. It was nice. 2-bedroom. The water was cold, which I got to adjust to. It was whatever. It was hot, so I was okay with that. So the living in the University of Cape Coast was fun. I enjoyed it. Had my personal space, AC, food, you know what I'm saying? Only thing that was like, was the bugs, you know, and the lizards, because I hate lizards. It was cool.
As African Americans, and I think it made me realize being over there how much I was not as proud of my heritage as I was once I went. I've gone through stages of feeling really militant, but not with a purpose, because I didn't really know my history. I just knew, like, I'm pro-Black, everything is Black, but if you start asking me questions about my heritage and where I come from, it was like, You know, where now it's like, nah, I've actually really been to Africa, and now, especially when we went to the slave castle and where the slaves had the last bath, like having those experiences and being able to talk about like the Asante tribe and where all of this came from and slavery and why, you know, slavery occurred and all these things. Now it's a different conversation with people. And last but not least, I will say this, what was very impactful was when we had Ghanaians and African Americans in the room together and we did the Unite conference. That literally also was a life-changing experience, because it made me realize for the first time the reason why I felt like we have so much division is, again, the narrative. We're both told the same things in different ways. They're told things about African Americans that comes from a white perspective. We're told things about Africans that comes from a white perspective. Hence, it's being strategically created, it's strategically creating division.
I think the first step is that once we have been authorized and energized to think about our subject formation as something that is critical and important, that we need to join together with other folks that are doing this kind of work, right? We need to join together with other folks that are suggesting that the church, that our relationship to Africa, that even our understanding of missions should be different. We need to gather together with those folks and begin to say, what is this curriculum that we should now be engaged in, and what should that look like, right? We need to look at folks that are doing that kind of work, right, around the country. We have progressive movements that are doing this kind of work, that are looking at the relationship of Black liberation to African liberation. We have folks that are doing things around Black and African theology in the academy. We have folks that are raising up activist groups to kind of think about those kinds of work. And then we have folks like Anidaso, we have folks and other organizations that are saying we've got to send folks back to not to offer Africa something, not to be in this kind of philanthropic, kind of paternalistic mode, but to learn in collaboration with our brothers and sisters and to create these conditions. I would say we got to start reading some things differently. We need to go and read James Cone. We need to read Emily Towns. We need to read Vincent Harding. We need to read, Black and African theologians together, and to begin to ask the question of, how is this different from what we've heard? How does this change the way that we have thought about the scripture or the gospel? How does this open up new venues for us to be in community and partnership with one another? And so I would say, let's start reading, let's start collaborating and work together. Let's start engaging with folks who are already doing this work, right? I think that we need to imagine that we are seriously deficient and seriously broken in the way that we've been formed, and that if that is the case, we cannot walk, but we need to run to solutions and initiatives and communities that will teach us how to love ourselves and to see ourselves in the full image that God has made us as African and as African descended peoples.
So for me, it was just, Sankofa 360 was almost like someone just giving me this like empowerment that I needed to know that you as a Black Christian can feel the way that you feel, can have the experience that you've had, can be upset by the things that you see in the world, and you can even go on to bring about change in those things. You don't have to keep your mouth closed. You don't have to be insecure in the things that you say. Become educated and just learning the power of knowledge and learning other people's experience, sharing your experience. It's really just all been like more life-changing than I can put into words.
The trip definitely helped to discover another identity that I had, and that was that I was African American for a long time. I would call myself just black because I didn't identify with African, because I didn't know anything about those people. I didn't know anything about the roots of Africa. I didn't even know where I come from. So it's just like, why would I call myself African if I don't even know what part of Africa my ancestors are from? Therefore, I don't identify with them. And then when I went to Ghana, it was just like, welcome home. You know, you're back, and it doesn't matter what part you're from, you're back home. And I got that wake up and was like, I am African and I'm proud.
The work of Anidaso, I think in many ways goes back to the root of the problem. This lack of identity, this breakage within the identity of black folk, and it works to kind of restore that, whether it's biblical manhood or biblical womanhood, whether it's being a black Christian, it works to really restore those things. And I think, you know, just getting back to the heart of it, one of the reasons that this all even came about was that when we look in the black community, we see so much hurt, and we see so many negative things, many of which are related to simply not knowing who you are, simply not knowing, you know, your worth. And so this experience, this organization works to build people up and then put them back into the community to build others up, to give them these experiences, and then create that cycle of positivity where people understand who they are, they understand their purpose, and as a result, they go back and get more people right. So they go back and get at peace of all of it.
The vision and the hope for Anidaso 360 is, our vision is to revitalize disenfranchised communities. And what that looks like is creating a space where people of African descent can truly embody some of the most basic principles of the human experience, such as the real freedom of religion, the freedom of really living in the dignity and the humanity of being just a regular human being without being judged based off what they look like, and not having systems that are in place that really do detrimental work and that essentially destroys a lot of our communities. I mean, if you look at some of the statistics around incarceration, drug abuse, the education disparities, oftentimes you find that folks in the diaspora, particularly black folks in America, are always at the bottom. And my vision is that we'll have a space where people can live life and be involved in a political, economic, and social structure and really understand who God has created them to be, while creating multi-generational transformation. My vision is that not another generation will be born or die in economic, spiritual, or cultural poverty.
Somebody told a lie one day. They couched it in language. They made everything black, ugly, and evil. Look in your dictionary and see the synonyms of the word black. There's always something degrading and low and sinister. Look at the word white. It's always something pure, high, and clean. But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.